Last year we still had to get
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2. Hello, hello there, out there. If all the raindrops were gumdrops, I was listening to the Barney song this morning with my grandchild, 4-month-old, just loves it. Jane Wilson, huh? It'll be in your head all day, yeah. If all the raindrops, tell Uzi, I'm sick, get this on. Let's see, when did I get club? Miss Lily, George. Nice to see you guys. Hello, hello. Here we are. It's a beautiful Friday morning. Well, yes, food, no, about it. We'll dive in. Hello, Curtis, Pauline, you know. Oh, yes. We did it. Hey, all the luck card. Done is customized the coin. No tax. Huh? Have you done? Carter. Hello, Carter. Hey, Carter. Carter. Juba. Over here, boy. I hear slow feet. Quicker than. Yes, you gotta hook these guys up. Hello, 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 hello. Yeah. Oh, Daisy.
Can you hear me on your headphones now?
When did they everybody gets up, you know? When what you had Keska Begiach. The making did a broad test. Sulion. Qu'est-ce que Begiawa?
Huh? Let's do evening. You do evening.
Hello, 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 hello. Hello, hello. What would you qu'est-ce que Begiach? What would you listen to which? What listen to which Koajik? Never did hear. Kill listen to which you Penals Kadui, so you can. Ulsit Cook. What there in Ulsit Cook? Bear River. Magana wajen Skano Village. El Skano Village. Bird Church.
Oh, lalo.
Mena-mena-agi ako. Wajen, mena-mena-agi ako. Kung pas mo kumaki, kumana kayo, may po. Kakadidad ko. Elsibuktuk, ano wajen Elsibuktuk? Meja po, wajen. Kilo. Magagawa suwa. Kimpi squad. Guess pedes kan. Ano dia dari Acadia. Bueno. Sebagai dia kali dua kan. Jadi sebagai dia kali Kurd sini. Abang Medan ni. Dalikan. Bahku ke gua kan. Bahku ke wajib. Where go back? Turun tua. Where turun tua? Millbrook. Where go back? Where go back? Where go back? Hello, sekarang. Asyik soal ni kan? Nasi hujan asyik soal. Oh, today sih juga kan? Oh, dapat sih juga. Alah, dapat sih juga. Segi apa aja. Someone does what call. Olha esse poeira. Olha esse. Wego ba. Wada ba. Wego ba ay mo juga. Alai ki. Wa amat ku wa karo. Wala ku amat ku. Alai ki wa ku. Wei no talai da. Edli ka sinda ni. Member 2, amazing member 2. Member 2. God. School or what that would be. But no, they go. I mean, Miss Lily on George. They came. I got to be dog power. They mean not suicide. Come down, love. Got it. Pick two landing. What did you do? Pick two landing. Don't let me see it. I'll do it. Don't we say pick two landing? Big took. Don't we say? Basket. Mommy go basket. Pick two ni mom. Cuma itu apa pun. Ada lagi situ na. There's no more boy. Ebe wit ko akalo. Jadi na do ek karo ebe wit ko. Wit lu edul lu ko. Lennox Island that was in Louis. Amsterdam basic. Princess wave. Ganito ating princess wave to. Tanong nyo, simyan ng pin. Princess. Wego ba? Niya. Ani kayo niya. Like a pit na princess wave to. Hey, Mom, night, Annapolis Valley, I was in on it, Old Orchard, I went to what you done, Princess Apple Blossoms Festival, not you, yeah? All right? Bunny King, right? But you go to the bookstore, Princess, do it. I go to the bookstore, do it, delete to on again, yeah? I see we had a bit. Double go with your princess, I got to, yeah. David Evani up. I was speaking to school with no news. I was at money area. Kizibu is coming. Marcus and Joe, but all they know. Make my women still looking at you funny? Hey, Marcus and Joe, make my girls still looking at you funny? Well, no, Gigi, comedian, he's a comedian. I'll kiss it. Come and join me if you want. Give us a few jokes. You don't know any jokes.
I just wanted to know, last night I found a purse in my room, had a lot of money, 2 bingo dabbers, and a chunk of loose Kinnigan. So there's a couple of women there look like they're retired cougars. I think it's them. It's so good to be here in this part of the country. I can't believe it. Last night there was 2 women fighting over me. I just let them. They're Esky queens. Hey, I couldn't beat that, eh? Yeah, it's good to be up here. First time I was up here. Second time I was up here was to pay alimony. Anyhow, I'm just hanging out over there trying to sell blankets for my next trip to the Caribbean. Look at this one, is checking me out there like she's really think I'm easy. She's got that faraway look. Hey, let's do a little morning exercise. I want to see if you are all thinking straight, okay? I want everybody to listen to me, but very carefully, okay? I want everybody to take their hands and put it up like this. Everybody, come on, put it up like this. I want you to slap it together like that. Make a small little circle like that. You see that little circle? Make it go like that. And everybody take that little circle like that and put it on your chin like this. Look how many people have no chins. Don't even know where their chins are. They're trying to figure it out, and you are the worst ones. Yeah. Anyhow, I'm Moccasin Joe. I'm from Thunder Bay, Ontario. I got my start here many, many years ago with the Mi'kmaq people. And I keep coming to this country. I married a lady from Pictou, Nova Scotia, divorced her. Married a woman from Esky, but she didn't want me because she wanted me to get a job. So I moved to Sydney, and then I went to Waikagamak. Anybody from Waikagamak? Where? Well, big deal. Anybody from Chapel Island? Oh, Chapel Island, I can't believe that. There was a beauty contest there 2 months ago. I won. So anyhow, if you want to check me out, my name is Moccasin Joe. Google me. I do laughter workshops all across Canada. I'm booked for 39 as of today doing that. So this is like a freebie, so I want a little donation. Come and buy it off me, okay? And I've got cards at my table where my daughter, my little granddaughter, my girlfriend, and my wife are working here, okay? Okay. So anyhow, but I heard a story about this guy. This is one of the craziest stories I ever heard. I heard this gentleman here, John Paul, what a name, John Paul. I heard a story about him when Escasoni here built a new laundromat. Oh, this guy was very supportive there. He brought all his clothes to the laundromat. All these, shirts, these tight jeans, as if, nice jeans. He brought it here, and holy man, next thing you know, he brought it down to the laundromat. He was so happy in support of an Aboriginal business. I'm really proud of you, John, for doing that. He brought his clothes there, and 2 days later he got his clothes back. Oh, his shirt was neatly pressed. His pants was nicely folded up. All these t-shirts were piled in things. But his shorts, that was a problem. He looked at them. Holy God, there was marks on them and stains on them. He got upset. He wrote a note back to the laundromat. Please use more detergent, more soap, more bleach. He got a note back 2 days later. Dear John, please use more toilet paper.
Hey, thanks very much. Get your morning laughs. By the way, he has a little booth on the other side at the gymnasium where they're selling some goods. There's also some other vendors over there. I know Mariah's over there. Sunday Lace Design, she does that beautiful beadwork. There's some organizations that are giving out some goodies. I know UINR ran out. They had some, well, how many got those posters they had moving? They had a great big moving free, and they had a smaller one. They had the videos. Man, when I is not. Clifford, they come up there. So if you have a chance, just come on, Majadayo. There'll be a 10% discount. Just tell them you're a register. Show them you get the 10%, and then you'll get tax-free. So we're waiting for our speakers to show up. All right, Doug, our sound is good. Yeah. And which go and Kisigo? Which go and which at least a little bit. I won't deal like this now. Back to a gojic. Kisigo and Kisigo's coming. I won't deal. Okay. Introductions? Good? Curtis, you're up.
Just been informed we have 3 minutes before we start here, so just a quick few announcements here. First of all, will you accept and I will look you. I am going to clap for that right on, John. I'm trying. Just got a quick notice here that for those of you who are able to, and I know there's many of you because I see a lot of this, you get a chance, take your cell phones out and go to www.halifax.ca and vote for the naming of a ferry in Halifax for Rita Joe. All right? There you go. We can do this, I know it. See other choices? Go to the website. Also, Blair informed me too that at the end when we have the draws for the prizes that you have to be here, okay? So that's pretty normal now. All right, before we begin here, keynote speaker. All right, I'm just gonna read up a quick bio of him. All right. Bernie Francis began the first university Mi'kmaq language program in 1984 at Cape Breton University, a program which is ongoing to this day. This featured 3 courses: rudimentary techniques of reading and writing, grammatical structure of Mi'kmaq, and the morphological structure of Mi'kmaq. He also taught for McGill University, Montreal, as well as St. Thomas University, New Brunswick, offering off-campus courses for Mi'kmaq community. Bernie continues to answer Mi'kmaq language questions originating from Yarmouth to Membertou, and I know for a fact it's further than that. He also helps out with curriculum materials and gives lectures to government employees and at different universities regarding the uniqueness of Mi'kmaq and its conceptual differences from English. His most recent and updated book was published in August 2016 entitled The Grammatical Structure of the Mi'kmaq Language, co-authored by Dr. John Houston, head of the Linguistics Department at Memorial University in Newfoundland. In October of this year, Bernie will be attending his 40th Algonquian Conference in Montreal, where Algonquianists meet and give papers on their research with various Algonquian languages. So it's my pleasure and honor to introduce to you Dr. Bernie Francis.
Amia hadi bakto go right room. So we do way. Edu blue dye microphone is not a hamas and that's we say do we lost it. Microphone. All right. Just good evening. This to which kala hospital medic. Never take us one away to see near about desk. I'm going to be switching back and forth for the sake of those who don't have the facility of speaking Mi'kmaq. I'll go back and forth. So I'm also going to say to you right at the outset that if you have any questions, feel free to ask. In 1974, we're going back about 42, 43 years. At that time, Peter Christmas was the director of Mi'kmaq Association of Cultural Studies. And I like to mention Peter because at the time, and even looking back at it now, Peter Christmas had a lot of guts to ask us to do what he was asking us to do. And that was to come up with a writing system that's easy to learn. We've proven that over and over again, that the Mi'kmaq orthography is very easy to learn as we now have it. But here's what he said. We don't have, who would we think we are if we just set out and started working on the writing system right here at the office? He said, that's not good. Go to the people, every reserve if you can, ask the people their opinion about this whole thing. So at that time, we only had 12 registered reserves. We have 13 now, but we only had 12 at the time. So Doug Smith, the professional linguist at the time, I was just in beginning of my training then, we set out to do the legwork that Peter Christmas asked us to do. We went as far south as Yarmouth and came up in that direction. Out of the 12 reserves that we had, we visited 9. The reason why we didn't really miss 3 is just that they were so small that, we figured, well, they'll get the message. by the local reserves. So we visited 9. There were some places that I visited that I must say I felt pretty uneasy and somewhat fearful, particularly in Truro, where a guy by the name of Charlie Marshall, an elder at the time, Charlie had done an awful lot of work in preserving the old prayers as well as the old songs that developed from the time the missionaries arrived, and particularly from the time that Father Maillard arrived, which was around 1723. So there was a lot of chants, a lot of songs, mostly to do with Christianity at the time. So Charlie Marshall preserved a lot of this stuff, and by the time Pacifique rolled around, which was about 1898, he died in 1946. He was buried in Listuguj. Pacifique, by that time, had a writing system going, using 13 letters of the Roman alphabet, much like Roman alphabet is what we use when we write English. And so Charlie Marshall took that writing system and used it to save all of these songs and these prayers and so on. If you saw Charlie's work, there's what I call volumes of it. It's about that thick. And he was the guy that I was most afraid of at the time. And I told Doug that, Charlie Marshall may object to revising and rewriting the entire orthography. Doug said, well, what can we do? He said, we'll go over and make our speech, and if he objects to it, he objects to it. And if more people object to it, then we just don't continue. Simple as that. So we went. So the people in Truro showed up at the time, and Charlie Marshall showed up. He was there. And we gave our spiel, basically pointing out that hardly anyone at the time, young people, nobody, but hardly any of the elders were writing the Mi'kmaq language in 1974. It's not that they say they never wrote it, because I saw letters written around 1930s, I believe, from our people who were working in Newfoundland at the time. I saw those personal letters, and I was quite surprised. They were written in pencil, but Cameron Paul from Membertou had those letters, and I saw the handwritten ones written to their mothers, basically just letting them know that they were okay and everything was going on. Everything that they did was to make money and to send money back home. So some of our people wrote it, but by the time 1974 rolled around, hardly anyone was using it. And that is why Peter Crispus, being an educator himself, he saw that this is going, our language is going by the wayside. So that's when he hired a professional linguist and said to him, our main goal, our mandate, is to come up with a writing system that the children, mostly the children, could learn easily. And so anyway, to go back to Truro, we gave our spiel. We told the people that the language is going to be lost, nobody's reading it and writing it. And the best way to lose a language, nowadays particularly, is not to read it and write it, not to see it anywhere, not to hear it anywhere. You didn't see it anywhere in 1974, and you didn't hear it on the radio. You didn't hear it on TV. And certainly in 1974, I can assure you there were many computers at the time. In fact, there weren't any at the time. That's how far we go back. No cell phones, no computers at the time. And so we did everything on the, I think it was called the IBM Ball, you know, that little typewriter that we had. It was the best we had at the time. I wish we had a computer. It would save us a lot of trouble, but nevertheless, we worked with what we had. So we spoke to the people in Truro, and I thought, anytime Charlie Marshall is going to jump up and he's going to say, what are you trying to do? You know, all my work. He sat there and he listened the whole time. And then finally, when we gave an entire spiel about the importance of coming up with a writing system, and it was tea time, Charlie Marshall walked over and I said to Doug, here he comes. He didn't have a club, but that's what I felt like, that he did have one. He came over and he said, he said, this is a hard system to read and write. And he was talking about the Pacific system, but we had nothing yet at that time. And when he said that, I said, gee, maybe he's... So he continued to talk, and he said, if you guys can come up with something easier, faster, something your children would learn, he said, that would be a good thing. He said, because this is a hard system to write. Well, that, to me, was like looking at the eighth wonder of the world. I was so bloody relieved that this man who knew the writing system that Pacific had come up with, who knew about it, who's actually read it, and who actually wrote it to copy songs and so on, he was supporting us. I said, wow, that is really, really good. I was very, very pleased. So I was encouraged. So when we began looking at Mi'kmaq, by 1976, by that time, I have 2 years of nothing but linguistics at the time. Steady. It's like a steady diet of the same thing over and over again. Every single day, we worked on Mi'kmaq 5 days a week, about 6 hours a day. And by 1976, 2 years later, I had looked at not just Mi'kmaq. That wouldn't be enough. You have to see what the other languages did and how they were doing. I looked at 3 of them in particular. I looked at, outside of Mi'kmaq, that is, I looked at Maliseet, I looked at Penobscot, and I looked at Passamaquoddy. Those languages are closest to us. They're in Maine. I looked at those languages and saw where they were at. I realized they were in very bad shape. I don't know if you could hear Passamaquoddy. Penobscot, yes, a little bit. Maliseet is doing okay because there's several reserves in New Brunswick area. And Mi'kmaq was not doing too bad at that time as well. But Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, I knew that that was the direction that our language, the Mi'kmaq language, was headed. In other words, downward. It's not going to last. So I made a prediction in 1976. I said at the time that I will give the Mi'kmaq language about 50 years. And it's going to be so in such bad shape that there will be no chance to resurrect the language. That was my prediction. Nevertheless, if someone thinks that I came along to save the language, that wasn't it. I don't deserve credit for being told that, yeah, you saved the language. I did not. I worked on the language because I loved it. I loved it. That's the only reason I stayed with it. I don't have the discipline to work on things I don't like to do. Some people have. I don't. But I loved it so much. I began to see the uniqueness and the intricacies of the Mi'kmaq language. I began to see how everything was intertwined and tied up with our language. I began to see why our people laughed in the things that they laughed at. I began to see some of the humor and how people tease one another. And then I began to see that a lot of these things could never be duplicated using any other Indo-European language like French or English or Spanish or any one of those other languages. It can only be done in Mi'kmaq. The second thing I began to see, because I looked at the old documents, I began to see how the language had changed. And I'm asking myself at that time, how could this happen? How could the language begin to change? I realized then for the first time that the language, again, is inextricably intertwined with the land, the climate, and everything that has to do with the maritime Atlantic provinces. Our language goes with the land and everything else that has to do with this land. It changes with the land. So our language is so unique that it actually, what you saw out, that it actually originated from here. It sprouted from this area. I began to see the uniqueness as time went on. Then I began to see, at that time, I began to look at it, but not so seriously at that time. I began to look at what is called being of spirituality. It hardly resembles what the people call spirituality today. And I'll talk about that perhaps later on. But I began to see the purity of being of spirituality, devoid of all of those crazy rules and regulations that you might hear today. It's gone berserk. I know now, it's taken me time, but I know now what is meant by being of spirituality. And I know that it's tied in with the language, very clearly. So I became, the more I learned, the more interested I became. And then around 1977, I revisited some of those words that were in our language. First one, of course, most important character, was Mandu. I loved it. I said to myself, this is a strange word. Now this is when linguistics comes in. This is when the analysis of the language came in very handy. In other words, the tools that I was learning studying linguistics were tools that I could use to analyze the language. Mandu is spelled M-N-T-U. And then I looked at it and I said, I wonder why the T after that N, why does it sound like a D? Well, with Doug's help, I realized that for that T to sound like a D, there has to be a vowel before it. Because if we have consonants, for example, like P, T, and K, and if you have a vowel on either side of P, T, and K, they're going to sound like B, D, and G. It's predictable, 100%. It's going to happen that way. So I asked myself, why does that T sound like a D? So I reconstructed the word Mandu. I respelled it. I added a vowel for now. Not permanently, but just for my own. I wanted to see what it looked like and what it sounded like. So I wrote it M-N-I-T-U to put that T in the middle. And then I wrote M-N-E-T-U, M-N-Schwa-T-U, M-N-U-T-U. And I looked at it. I said, gee, And the reason why I got suspicious, by the way, was because there was a woman from Eskasoni who used to visit another elderly lady by the name of Nancy Paul. Peter, you might know Peter Paul from Member 2 and Margaret Gould, Sugar and Joanne's sister. Margaret is married to Peter. It was Peter's grandmother. Peter was my friend at the time, and the two elderly ladies would sit down. Just, you see, when we visited one time, I used to notice the elders, you don't visit for a few hours, you stay there for 2 weeks. That was a good long visit. So they'd come up, and I would sit there, and I would be in awe of the stories that they told. Those were the first two that I remember clearly about the old stories they talked about. The legends, stories which really were not what you would call, not to be taken literally, but they were teaching tools. This is what they were doing. Jibin, everybody remembers Jibin, I think. Jibin was another guy. I used to go to his house, and he would tell us stories until finally I had to leave. He scared the living daylights out of us because of his ghost stories. But ghost stories weren't all he told. He told so many stories. But here was the thing that struck me. At this point, I'm probably about 25, 26 years old. It finally struck me, in all the stories I've heard, not once did I hear this story about the devil. Every time someone told a story about the devil, like the young people, I knew that this was something that was just brought in recently. But the elders at the time, no. I never heard the story about this devil. So I figured, well, that's strange. That is very strange, because the devil is unseen, but yet he occupies the psyche of our people. So why have I not heard stories from these elders about the devil? I asked myself that question. So, again, to go back to the word, after I reconstructed it to Manidu, and so on, finally, you know, not being a rocket scientist, I realized that's because the word isn't the devil. It's the old word for God. And I immediately looked at Cree and Ojibwe, those two in particular, and I saw that their word was manitu, manitu. And Mi'kmaq used to be something like manitu, absolutely the same word, except they didn't fall into the trap. See, we're the ones that saw the missionaries first. We're the ones that had to deal with the French priests and so on. So we got indoctrinated much longer than the Crees and the Ojibways. When that struck me, I said, holy smokes. Here was a word, the word Manitou, that was held in reverence by our people. And yet, people now refer to it as the devil. How did that happen? So, I read the old missionary documents, and I read everything that there was to read. And finally, I saw it took 100 years. 100 years for that word Manitou or Manitou to go from creator to devil. I said, gee. Then I said, what else is there? What else is there that they did this to? I went to the next powerful word and a powerful person in our culture, and it was booing. So I checked booing and checked that out to see. And of course, I had to do, it was a little bit of research I had to do one time. Not research, academic research, but I had to do research for a court case. And it involved some people in Wahmancook. So I went to Wahmancook and I interviewed a few people there, the elders. When I came upon this word, booing, man, what a total different demeanor that this elder would take. They were scared not only of a bowing, but they were actually scared of the word. That's how powerful that word bowing was. It kind of shocked me at the time. I realized, holy smokes. So the lawyer that was with me at the time didn't speak Mi'kmaq. His name was Art Molan. He said, what was that all about? What happened to him? I didn't know how to explain it. I explained it as best as I could, but he couldn't quite understand. He's still scratching his head. And I got the idea that Bowen is very powerful individual in the community historically and even to this day. What happened there? Why would a Mi'kmaq person be afraid of a Bowen? Once again, it was the work of the missionaries. Because as I went back again at those documents, I realized that a Bowen was a very, very powerful person. He was, I guess you could call a well-rounded doctor. Dr. Berwick had nothing on him. I told Dr. Berwick that, by the way. A Bowen was a medicine man, but he was also a psychotherapist. If you had issues, mental issues, that's who you went to. And a lot of the mental issues that he could handle were situational mental issues. That is, there's nothing really wrong with your brain, but because maybe you're having a problem with the family, you want to kick the husband out because he's this or that kind of stuff. Those are those problems I'm talking about that this Bowen could handle. Because he was a wise man. He's dealt with a lot of people. He's listened to a lot of problems. So he was a very, very powerful man. Very powerful. And at the time I asked myself, what happened? Why did the priest do this? Because a Bowen had to be reduced to almost, not only just a nobody, but someone who's actually evil. In English they say a sorcerer, or someone who put the hex on you and really finish you off or make you sick or something like that. That's what the missionaries were teaching. Why? Because he was in the way. A Bowen was in the way, just like this Manitou, or Manitou, the word for creator, were in the way for the conversion. People didn't rely on the missionaries at that time. They relied on the Bowen, and they relied on our Manitou, creator at the time. So the missionaries had to work hard. That's why I say it took 100 years for that to turn into something which we know today. Mandu, today if you were to ask anyone, well, there's one Mandu there in the orange shirt. Actually, Mandu, most people would say, oh yeah, well that's the devil. Well, yeah, I guess it is today, and the word has changed. But remember where it originates from. We didn't have. So every time I gave a talk somewhere, and I talked about this change in the language because of the European influences, I would say to them, you know, we didn't have a devil in North America. That means that he must have been a stowaway in one of those ships that came over here. You brought him over. Because up to that point, we didn't have one. So maybe he's still hanging around, I don't know. But anyway, so I started to look at this stuff, and the more I saw, I wrote little bits and pieces, but I was a little bit more afraid at that time, because I really didn't want to offend, you know, some of the elders. Nowadays, I decided, well, damn it all, I got my certificate as an elder 2 years ago. I don't give a shit. Now, I don't want to still, of course, I still would want to offend the elders, but then again, I'm right about there myself. I'm right on the cusp, shall we say, of being an elder. So I can say things now that I couldn't say when I was younger. And I don't mind saying them because it's not to offend anyone, but it's mainly to wake us up and to let us know that, you know, we have to look at our language a little bit more carefully. If we don't do that, even now, we may think that we're immune to more conversions. We were converted into the Christian faith. We may say to ourselves, this is it. That, you know, we were Catholics. Nobody's going to do that again. Not quite true. Don't think that they're not trying. Last year, I heard a friend of mine that he was going to start visiting and talking to our people. He was going to build a synagogue. Not a synagogue, I'm sorry. The other one, not the Jewish, but the Muslims. This guy, a mosque, sorry. Abu Skadal. But anyway, well, but anyway, so they're going to build a mosque somewhere in Manitou, just about 10 miles outside of Sydney. And I said, gee, what's he going to do? I mean, there's not that many here. And so I got to talking to him one day, and he said, you know, he said, the Mi'kmaq people, you know, are great people. He's buttering me up, you know, making me feel pretty good. Okay, I'll take that, we're good people. And then he said, you know, he said, we have a great religion, the Muslim religion. And I think perhaps it's time to introduce the Muslim religion to the Mi'kmaq people. He didn't say a whole lot more than that. It was obvious what he was doing. Obvious. Because prior to him, he was the latest guy that I saw was doing that. Prior to him, it was a Christian religion, all right. But it wasn't Catholics, it was Jehovah's Witnesses. Prior to that, it was the Mormons. Prior to that, they come knocking at our door all the time. And I remember one time an elder saying to me, you know, and he said it to me in Mi'kmaq. He said, you know, what they're really doing. He said, when they come to our door and they got their Bibles in their hand knocking at the door, we answer the door. And they start talking to us about the religion. They're saying, you're not quite good enough the way you are. But if you become a Muslim or a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon, whatever, now you'll be fine. That's what the Christian told us. We're still we're backpedaling now a little bit. Because we're beginning to look at, revisit some of the things that we were taught. And I like that idea. I like that idea that people are beginning to look at what we had. Because I can say now, without any any reservation whatsoever that we have a pure, about the purest form of spirituality that you can get. About the purest form. Somebody said to me, you've had a writing system beginning about it began about 1690. Not with Pacific. Pacific didn't come around until about 1890 something. But other missionaries came around, and this guy name was Leclerc. He came around in about 1690, and he started working on what is now known as or the hieroglyphs. He started working on them. And over the years, people have asked me, why is it that Mi'kmaq people have been Catholics for 400 years? Why is it that we have never had a Bible that we wrote? I'm not talking about a translation job. I'm talking about a Mi'kmaq Bible. Why is it? Because I'm thinking to myself, you have to know the structure of the Mi'kmaq language to realize why that is. Some people have said, because they heard me say this many times, although they don't quite really understand what it is. I've said many times, once I discovered it back in 1976, that the Mi'kmaq language is a verb-oriented language. What does that mean? I'll tell you. It means that in the eyes of the language, let's call the language, first of all, a filter, because we do see the world through our filters. English is one filter, French is another. Mi'kmaq is a different, very different filter from those other ones. So our language is a verb-oriented language, meaning that it's composed of verb, mostly verb. Our language tells us what Einstein finally came up with around 1920s, that nothing is stationary, that everything is changing all the time. You might have heard the phrase, the only thing that's constant is change. That's very true. That's very true if you look through the filter of the Mi'kmaq language. It's always, always changing. And if you write a Bible, and there are many Bibles, not just the Christian Bible, if you look at the Muslim Bible, the Quran is called, and if you look at all of the other Bibles, those Bibles, many of them are stuck in time. Why else do you think there are all these wars going on? Because you have a Bible and suddenly you have one group of people interpreting it this way, another group interpreting it that way, and finally a third group comes in, and finally you have all these different interpretations, and pretty soon you have conflict, and from that, of course, arises some kind of a war. Our people, I think, at some point realizes, yes, that was true a few years ago. What you're telling me is true a few years. It's not true anymore. How can you stick with that? How can you stick with that? You know, things change. It doesn't matter what it is. Nothing stays the same. It was then that I became very, very proud of what it is to know, not to be just a Mi'kmaq, but to know the Mi'kmaq language. And let me also say this. To our people that do not speak the language, if you don't speak the language and you feel that you may never learn to speak the language, that's okay. But no excuse for not learning about the language. Learn about the language, learn its structure, learn, why it is that our people see the world differently. It's very, very good. Let me give you an example about what the difficulties that the missionaries had. When they arrived, we had these words for the Creator, as our people know. It wasn't just one. The word was this. The major one was Gisul. But I've also seen Anquayuk. I've also seen Degwayuk, and a few other words like that. You know what? Those words, every single one of them are verbs. Verbs. That should tell us something right off the bat. It means that God is not a noun in our culture. It's a forever changing, whatever you want to call it. It's an entity of some sort. Here's the other thing, which is also beautiful. If you say Gisul, who do you mean? Do you mean a male? Could it be a female? And let me take it a little bit further and say, could it be an it? All of those three are correct. Can you imagine? It drove the missionaries crazy when they realized that this word gizul could be interpreted to mean a male, a female, or an it. You could say gizul, you could mean that man. You could say gizul, you could mean that woman. But you could also say, you see what I mean? It could be an object of some sort. We don't know. I guess we, the Mi'kmaq people, are first to admit we really don't know what God is. We just know that it exists, whatever it is. We just don't know what it is. It's beyond our human, not just the Mi'kmaq, but human comprehension. Philosophers way before Jesus was born told us that. You can never fathom this thing that we call God or what we call Creator. You know, so the missionaries were not happy with that, just the same. Why? Because the missionaries were indoctrinated into believing that God was a male. By the time they arrived here, I'd say the Bible was probably 1,400 years old at that time. Of course, it went through many translations. We don't know what the first Bible read. I bet you it doesn't resemble what it is today. But it's very different. We can say for sure it's very different. Being a translator, I know how difficult it is to go from English to Mi'kmaq or to go from Mi'kmaq to English. You can imagine, it went through 5 or 6 different languages. When the Bible was first written, by the way, there was no such language as what is now called the English language. The language didn't even exist. That came into being about 1,000 years later, and it was very, very slow. You see? But when the missionaries arrived, here was their problem. They were already been indoctrinated for hundreds and hundreds of years that God was a male. When they arrived here and they began to look at the language so that they could work with us, they saw this word that the Mi'kmaq people were using, gisul. When they really found out what it was, they began to have problems. They began to have problems. Why? Because you couldn't pin it down. You couldn't say it's male, you couldn't say it's female, or an it. That bothered them. So they had to do something, and they had to do it fast. They had to come up with a word that meant that people would be sure that this God that they were preaching to us about was male. So they come up with a word. They understood the language pretty well. They knew the word for grandfather, niskamich, and they decided to use that word and just cut out the last 2 letters, ich, which now you have niskam. Absolutely male through and through. Can't be a grandfather and be a female. At least I've never seen it. And there you go. That's where our word originates now. The old word for grandfather, God. Because it wasn't for our sake. It wasn't for our sake. It was for their sake. To make sure that God was a male. They had to work very, very hard to ensure that we saw God as a male. Too bad, you know. And in the 1970s, I remember when we were working on our language, and I was beginning to see all these interesting things. Gloria Steinem was an author, and she was an avowed feminist at the time. And after she wrote a couple of books, she was a highly intelligent woman, there was an issue as to whether God was a male or female. So you will see these T-shirts that came out at the time. I remember seeing them. It said, God, just in big letters, God, and on the bottom it said, she will look after you. That was Gloria Steinem's way of objecting to this maleness of the universe. She was absolutely right. But I got to thinking at the time, had our language not been tampered with at the time by the missionaries, I would have asked Gloria Steinem to come to Eskasoni or any other Mi'kmaq research that spoke Mi'kmaq and say, look, what's the problem here? You know, we have a word, gisulk. You can take it if you want. Because then that should satisfy you. Because it could be a male, could be a female, it could be an it. So that would eliminate all your arguments, a war that you're about to converge upon the people of the United States. So, you know, I see, as I was going through, I began to see this stuff. I said, holy smokes, this is absolutely phenomenal. Our language is definitely rooted, not only in this land, but it originated from here, not from somewhere else. And our psyche is with this land, with what we call Mother Earth. And when we wrote the book, published about 4 or 5 years ago, it was called The Language of This Land. The Language of This Land, Mi'kmaq, was the title of the book. One of the most important words I used then, and Barbara Sillevoy asked me a very good question yesterday about this. I'll mention it in a minute. But here's the thing, Darren. In 1749, when Eddie Cornwallis was governor of Nova Scotia, Halifax, he did all kinds of crazy things to our people. As we know, Danny Paul has been speaking about it for about 40 years or whatever. At that time, Cornwallis made our people's lives miserable. Not only the fact that he put out a law that stated that if you bring a male scalp, we'll pay you 40 pounds, or $40, shall we say. 20 pounds if you bring a female, and we'll give you a few bucks for it. If you scalp a child, you bring them in to me, that kind of stuff. That's only one thing. The other thing that Cornwallis did was, we couldn't make a living. We couldn't, in the territories that we were asked to go to and to live, we couldn't keep ourselves alive. We were able to roam free in all of Nova Scotia for our medicines, for our food, everything. We lived by waterways because that was our highway. Not only was it our highway, but we were able to fish and collect our food at the time. So what happened? In 1749, our people by that time were in very bad shape in Nova Scotia. So a chief from Chapel Island at that time decides that he's going to write a letter to whom he called Sahama. He called Eddie Cornwallis Sahama at the time, or chief. He writes a letter, he dictates a letter to this missionary, Father Maillard. Father Maillard transcribed it in using the regular alphabet that we know today, transcribed the letter. It was about a page long in a regular size sheet. The letter was delivered and so on. It really never got anywhere. That letter was brought to me around 1982 or 83 by the former Chieftain, Ellick Denny. He brought it to my office one day. I had never seen that letter before. He put it down in my office and he said to me, "Can you make this out?" It's written in Mi'kmaq. I looked at it. The first thing I saw was the title. And the title said, in French, it said, Déclaration de guerre, or Declaration of War. I said, holy, this got to be interesting, because I don't remember in anything I've ever read so far that our people ever declared war on anybody. You know, there was never a war here. There were skirmishes between the Mohawk and so on. That's not a war exactly, territorial, you know. But when I saw this and it said Declaration of War, I said, wow. So I said to Ellick at the time, I said, I'm not really sure about it, Ellick, but leave it with me and I'll see what I can do. So I sat down and I started working on it. Because it was, can you imagine, 1749 letter dictated to by a chief from Chapel Island. I went through it word by word by word. It took me 1 month, 1 page, 1 month to go through this letter to figure out what it was saying. But as I was going through it word by word at the time, there's a couple of things I noticed right away. And one of them was the fact that in 1749, we had an R in the Mi'kmaq language. Okay? Like, for example, Marligewage instead of Muligewage. By the way, Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, was also called Mulligewage. Again, it was called Marligewage with an R. That R existed in 1749. Doesn't exist anymore in Mi'kmaq, but it existed at the time. So that's the first thing I noticed. So I continued on, word by word by word. And when you work on a letter, word by word, you really don't know, you don't make sense of what the whole letter is saying. At this time, I'm just trying to bring the old words, trying to understand what they're saying, and bring them up to modern day Mi'kmaq.
Thank you.
When I was finally finished, or almost finished, I had 2 lines left to go. And I looked at it and I read it. You know, I was alone in my office at the time, and I remember the tears coming down when I read this letter. And I looked at the title once again to see if I was reading the French correctly, because it said Declaration of War. It was the furthest thing from the Declaration of War I ever saw. It was no declaration of war whatsoever. Someone had put a title on it, and it was a way of discrediting us. It was a way of saying, you people declared war, here's the letter, therefore you were beaten, therefore you have no rights left in Nova Scotia. That's what it was all about. That's some title. I don't think they expected that somewhere along the way, some dumb Indian like me would look at this letter and actually, decipher it. In 1984, many of you will notice the Moose trial happened. A lot of people were charged, 17 people, our people were charged in Hunter's Mountain for hunting moose out of season. Grand Chief Donald Marshall was one of them at the time. And so they're all charged, and I had nothing, I was there at the time. I wasn't hunting, but I was there. So sometime a few months later, a trial began in Nova Scotia. It happened in Sydney. Bruce Wildsmith was the lawyer for us and a couple of assistants, and a woman by the name of Alison Scott was working for the government at the time. She was a government lawyer, and they were trying to make the case that we did not have any rights. They brought in an expert at the time. The expert's name was Steve Patterson, a well-known historian from University of New Brunswick, Fredericton. They brought him in. They set up a nice table for him. By the way, when the government brought him in to testify against us that we had no rights, he was being paid at the time $1,500 a day. That's 1984, a lot of big bucks, plus expenses, plus hotel, and plus whatever he was doing the prosecutor, but I won't go there. So anyway, that was a bonus, I think. So Steve Patterson is sitting on the witness chair, and they had all these books here. And every now and again, they'd ask him a question. He'd pick out a book, and he'd go through, and he said, yep, here, the Micmacs were here, the French were here, this is what was going on, and yeah, tensions were happening, This is the way he was talking. And all of a sudden, he pulls up something off the desk, and I'm sitting in the back. I was just there, once again, just as a spectator. All the lawyers are up there in the front, all our papers, they've got the courtroom covered. This Steve Patterson all of a sudden whips out this paper, just like a gun. He goes, and this, he says, he has the paper in his hand. This was the thing that's supposed to put the final nail in the coffin, He said, and this, he says, is proof that there was a war because the Mi'kmaq people declared war. Right there, it's a Declaration of Guerre. As soon as he brought that up, of course, now I'm sitting up in my chair, my ears are like this, listening. I couldn't believe what he was saying. He started to talk about what was in that letter. Totally, so far off. He didn't know what he was talking about. So I sent a letter to Bruce Wildsmith. A little note. He's sitting there. And he gets up off his chair. He comes over very quietly. And he said, are you sure you know about that letter? I said, I certainly do. I said, it took me a month, I said, to decipher that letter. Grand Captain Ellick Denny brought it to my desk at one point, and I had to look at it. He said, is it a declaration of war? I said, no, it's not. It's a chief from Chapel Island writing to Cornwallis in Halifax, saying to him, look, we were a rich nation. We had everything we could possibly need. Our Creator provided us with everything. We were rich. Rich. We could roam the land, no problem. Nobody ever restricted us. This was our land. In fact, this is where I got that word. In the letter it says, in other words, this is where we sprouted from. In other words, I never saw that word ever used that way before for a human being. Never. You hear the word sahaliyah or sahaliyahan, which is plants. Or in the springtime, our people will say, everything is sprouting nicely. You always use it for plants or buds or something. That's what that word is usually used for. So at that time in 1984, when I looked at that letter and I saw what he used it for, that's what caused me to bring tears to my eyes. Because I realized because he was making the point very strongly. He said, that letter is there for you to read anytime. It's on the internet. It's in a couple of books. And in Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq also have that letter. It's everybody's letter. So it was a complaint letter to Cornwallis saying, the audacity that you could come in to our land and do this to us, our rich nation. We have nothing. But then he says in the letter, I would like to take this time to ask you to invite me so we could sit down and talk for the sake of my people. We're very poor, we're sick, and so on, because we're not getting proper nutrition. You know, we're a downtrodden people, so I'd like to talk. Of course, it's no secret that that meeting never happened between Cornwallis and our people. But the letter is there, written in 1749. And then, as I say, I looked at that letter. It was the most interesting thing that I think I've ever done, is to decipher that letter. Very happy to have done it. Very happy to have had Elliot Denny give me the, confidence that perhaps I could do something with it. Not only that, I also, because he knew my connections, I got in contact with Dr. Hewson, another linguist who teaches at Memorial University in Newfoundland. And I ran it by him, and he's a very good linguist. And he knows quite a bit of Mi'kmaq because he worked with the last few speakers that were left in Conn River. So I sat down with him and went over it just to make sure that my own thinking was right on this. And the second reason why I used him was because he was a French speaker. And that letter initially was written in French, and then at some point, it was written in Mi'kmaq, but it was written in French afterwards. And I asked Dr. Hewson if he could look at the French and look at what I've done to see if they match. There was a few little changes there, but nothing major. It was essentially the same. So at that time, to go back to the trial, Stephen Patterson was getting paid $1,500 a day plus expenses. And so after I said to our lawyer, Bruce Wasby, he said, would you testify to that? I said, you're damn right I would not testify to that, because look, he's saying that this is declaration of war. It isn't. So I go up on the witness stand, and of course, there's like what they call a voir dire, I guess. There's a big battle going on as to whether I'm an expert or not. I wasn't an expert, but I could read that letter. And there's a big battle going on between the prosecutor. The prosecutor wants to get me off because I'm a nobody. And our lawyers are saying, yes, he is somebody. He was able to translate this whole letter of 1749. So anyway, finally they let me go. They decided to allow me to read this. And I read it in Mi'kmaq and as I translated it. And finally they realized, Steve Patterson, who was by that time sitting in the chair that I was sitting in, when I went up to the witness stand, his courtroom was filled, you could see him. Finally, I could only see this top part of his head. He never believed that our people have gone to the point, and I say our people because the money that was spent to develop this orthography beginning in 1974 was our money, everybody's money. That was our money that was used. And it cost altogether, in a 6-year period, about $250,000 altogether. So that was our money. So he couldn't believe that there would be anybody around that actually could read that letter of 1749 with the horrible writing system that was used at the time. So I was proud. Before long, after that, two things happened. The prosecutors, or the lawyers working for the government, began to lose their confidence because of that letter. Suddenly they realized, no, only the letter suggested declaration of war, nothing else. And then I think a case came down from British Columbia at the time called a Sparrow case, similar type of case, and before long they threw out the whole thing. You know, and then from that time the government says, all right, let's negotiate for your hunting, you know. Suddenly they want to negotiate. Anyway, I was very, very happy that we are at the level right now we are beginning to take control of our own language. As I said, let me first say that I am ecstatic. I'm very happy that my prediction was wrong. Very happy. I was worried. And I'll say once again, I wasn't working on this language to try to save it. I didn't think it could be saved. I worked on it because I was fascinated by what was in it and what it all contained. And to this day, I still feel the same way. It's the kind of job that I can't retire from. I'll be doing it until you carry me off to or spread my ashes over somewhere. But anyway, we're still doing it. And I'm not alone anymore. That's probably the biggest satisfaction. When I came here one time in Eskasoni, around that time, we're talking before 1980, and we had a similar kind of a writing. We were just working on it. I came here, I taught it here in Eskasoni, and people came, some elders came, some younger people, and they're still around here today. And they caught on to it so quickly. Before long, they were passing it along. Then I was asked to go to Big Cove, and I spoke to people there. They already had a lady working on the writing system there, but she was using the Pacific system, which was fine, but at least they were doing something. This Jewish was doing something. But I was particularly proud of this area, because it just didn't fall out of the sky. It took work. Not only that, the criticisms in the early stages that I ran up against. At that time, it was rough. But finally, people began to understand, and some of those biggest critics in the early days, best supporters today. Best supporters. They're teaching it, they're using it. So, you know, I don't in any way feel alone. I feel, in other words, it doesn't matter. What was worrying me in 1980 when Doug Smith left, everything that had been worked on the language about the orthography was all here, between my ears. Nobody knew about it. I was in a panic. I figured if I get killed in a car accident, there it goes. So I had to work very hard and go and see as many teachers as possible, visit as many reserves as possible to get this off my shoulders. And by golly, it worked. When people learned that they could learn this just like that, it started to develop. That's why nowadays, from having nothing before 1974 to what we have today, I'm quite proud of it, because I don't care too much about the misspellings here and there. We'll work on that. Yes, there are misspellings, and I'm going to talk about that in my other class. That's no big deal. We'll work on that. We will become better spellers. Don't always remind ourselves that this is new to us. It's all brand new still. And then the other thing is the grammar. Well, we'll work on that too. We'll have to straighten up the grammar a little bit. No problem. The fact is, Eskasoni and Mohammed Cook and Memberton took the initiative to say, by golly, we're going to go back and we're going to teach our children our heritage. Where would you find our heritage except in the language? That's where it is. So they decided, yep, we're going to open it up. And before long, the chief of Eskasoni came to me a year ago, and he said, would you come and do a keynote address? I said, for what? I had no idea that this was going on. I think Judy knew about it, the director of the Big, but I had no idea. So Chief Leroy tells me at the time, well, they're going to start a total immersion. Geez, I think I nearly creaked my neck when he said, looked at him like this. I said, are you kidding? He said, no, they're actually going to begin a total immersion school. I said, really? He said, yeah, they're going to do it. I said, wow, I'm happy, but I can't believe it. He said, yeah, they're going to do it. I said, yes, I'll go to that. That was last year. And then, of course, since then, I heard Mohammed Cook is doing the same thing. And, of course, it's gradually gaining ground and getting stronger. And, of course, again, through Mi'kmaq Ginamad, you'll see that books are being developed for children and so on. And all very important stuff. We have to, it's not enough to hear Mi'kmaq anymore, not in this day and age. You also have to see it. We have to see it on the computers, we have to hear it in our songs, and we have to see it in books. And that's exactly what we need. Our people have to realize this is a viable language. You know, the reason why, what time is it? Oh yeah, is it 25 past 10? Oh, I got a couple of minutes. It's got some Gigi. But here was the thing. We had these arguments, of course, that were put in our heads early. And one of the arguments was this. Why would you want to bother learning Mi'kmaq at this day and age? It's not going to get you a job. You're better off learning French and English. Learning Mi'kmaq is going to get you nothing. You heard all of that. And it said, and then of course, every now and again, I saw in some of the old documents that I read, written by explorers, historians, that the Mi'kmaq language was a bush language, they called it. In other words, it's okay to use it out there in the bush, but for heaven's sakes, are you crazy that you're actually thinking that it's going to be ever in the schools? Nah, it's just a waste of time. These were the arguments, you know, over the years. You hear them, you think you're winning, and all of a sudden someone would come up with a statement like that, and you say, oh, Jesus. And that's why, I guess, in the early days, I didn't think it would ever catch fire. But by golly, it did. And I'm happy, I hope you're happy, and I congratulate you all for the fantastic attention, the kind of attention that you're putting towards the language. Because once again, I'll tell you, so will all of the other chiefs in every other community in Canada, that our culture, our spirituality is in the language. Well, I'll leave them.
Right now, we're just getting ready for some presentations, and it will be a nutrition break at 11:30. Barbara Sillaboy will be doing Mi'kmaq stories in room 105. Chief Captain Hunley Denny will have a session in room 102. Janine and Tex Marshall will be doing yoga in room 202. Ida